Okay, my name is Vic Semenyuk, Dr. Vic Semenyuk. My qualifications are I have a science degree from the University of Sydney, a doctorate from the University of Sydney. I was awarded 2 postdoctoral fellowships. One was the prestigious Queen's Fellowship, in which I began studying the Mardoowarra, particularly at Seaward End. And I've been involved with the Mardoowarra now for 45 years. That is, the Mardoowarra itself, as well as the Kimberleys to the north and the Great Sandy Desert to the south. So I have a long history of research, investigations into that area. Shall I carry on? Yes, I often start this way. I'm going to talk about why I'm in the Mardoowarra and what I've done. I always use a metaphoric beginning, saying that I actually don't come from this planet. The nearest star to us is Alpha Centauri's. There's a planet around there. I visited there 1 million years ago to Australia and discovered the Mardoowarra, and I found that it was globally unique. Other river systems like the Amazon, the Mississippi, the Rhine, the Rhone, the Murray River, rivers around the world, different settings all have their uniqueness, but the Mardoowarra is unique because of sitting against running along the line of a upland of the Kimberleys and the Great Sandy Desert, a dry zone to the south, a wet zone to the north, and runs along a geological system. It has responded, has created assemblages of biota in response to the hydrological system. I returned from Alpha Centauri planet, I won't give the name of the planet, about 50,000 years ago, and found that people had come, the First Nation people, and they lived in the river. They lived alongside the river, and they lived in harmony with the river. And I documented that. And now I've come back and see what's happening. And it's from that basis where I'm looking at that river 1 million years ago, before humanity even existed, and it was already a globally significant river from my point of view, to 50,000 years ago when the First Nation arrived here and was living in the river in a harmonious way. And I've come to understand the river from those perspectives, and therefore when I talk about global significance and social significance globally, or the archaeological significance, is from those perspectives of being a visitor from outside of this planet. I came to Australia as a World War II refugee, as a Polish refugee, and I spent many years here before I discovered the story of Australia and the invasion by the Europeans into Australia and the displacement of the Aboriginal people, and I left Australia in 1998. I came back by chance, it was a few years later, and discovered that I was actually needed here, and I decided to put all my scientific knowledge to use to fight for Aboriginals and to fight for kangaroos. I spent 45 years in the Kimberleys, Mardoowarra and Great Sandy Desert, focused on the natural history until I discovered the Aboriginal problem. And now I fight for Aboriginal land rights and water rights in addition to fighting for kangaroos. I use my scientific knowledge to raise consciousness about the heritage value of Mardoowarra. That's answering your question.
Can you tell us about the current state of the Mardoowarra and what threats is under the hood?
To answer that question, I have to tell you about the attributes of the Mardoowarra. The Mardoowarra is a complex system, and if I had my slideshow, you would have seen 13 components, which makes it a complex system. And it starts off with the geological setting, how the water comes into the system. It focuses on the G Gully Creek and how it's got a history inside of it that represents or records climate change, because as Australia moved away in the last 50 million years from Antarctica, it went from Arctic climate through temperate climate, wet climate like with Tasmania today, into arid zone climates heading towards the equator. And as it passed through those climatic zones, G Gully Creek, which was in existence for most of that time, records that history uniquely in the world, a history of climate change and sedimentary fill of a river, whereas something like Africa and America separated horizontally, plate tectonics, Australia moved northwards, so it moved through the climatic boundaries. Third one is that there's a hydrological system in the Mardoowarra. We have rainfall, which provides you with direct water. We have runoff, and we have groundwater discharge from the north and from the south, and particularly important that from the south. As that comes from the south, the Great Sandy Desert meets the Mardoowarra Valley Tract, it meets a plug of fluvial sediments, and you have to watch my fingers, meets that plug of sediment and builds up overtops and produces springs along the edge of the Mardoowarra, which becomes globally important springs. Savanna plains on the floodplains, the animals and plants. There are many endangered species, globally unique species, and they've been protected, are protected by international treaties or the EPBC Act. I could go through a whole list of things that are complicated, and I'll end up with the last one of the 13, is that termite mounds here in the Mardoowarra are different to what's occurring around the world, because there's a silica component that where the termites are using, and their termite mounds are silicified. They start to create a soil type when they flatten out after the rain. They build a city, then they flatten out and produces a unique soil type. So I would go through all that type of information first to show how, of all the components of the Mardoowarra, there are most of globally significant, unique, and a number are nationally unique. And from there I then say, right, what are the threats? Any water extraction that interferes with the interconnectedness of water, agriculture that destroys vegetation and modifies the soils in a new way, mining like coal or metals, fracking, very important phenomenon. It's not important to nature, but important to people, but it's very important in that it destroys the hydrological system by fracturing the rock and changes the hydrological aquifer properties in the subsurface. Cattle. Now these are the types of things that will modify or destroy the Mardoowarra. And the connectedness, since I say it's all connected in terms of a hydrological system, I will say it rains in the wet season, in the monsoon, but when it stops raining in the monsoon, the groundwater, the whole groundwater system, the hydrological system maintains the whole of the Mardoowarra hydrologically, ecologically, to keep it going through the rest of the year before the monsoon returns.
In terms of all those threats that you outlined, what, in your opinion, needs to be done to protect the Mardoowarra and repair the damage in the
Right, the first thing I think has to happen is that it sounds like it's like almost anti-social. I would say recognise the global heritage value of the Mardoowarra socially, in terms of its heritage and natural history, and then once it's recognised as being a globally significant area, allow the natural people to be custodians of the land, to look after the land the way they always have. That's the most important thing.
So just give us a moment, they're going to have a think. Brendan or Irene? Brendan, does anyone have any questions?
I just would like both witnesses to elaborate on the fracking threats that have come to the fore recently in the area of the Mardoowarra. The fracking threats.
Fracking basically is a shortened word of saying we're fracturing rock.
Yeah, no, I'm asking about the specific threats that have been presented from particular corporations. Has there been exploration? Where are we at with the development of interest in that area?
There is exploration of where fracking can take place. There are exploration licenses, leases being organised, and if fracking takes place in the full gamut of what's intended, it will fracture the subsurface rocks that are aquifers to the region, that are providing water through seepage, water through artesian upwelling, and contaminate water that does end up at the surface.
But it hasn't started yet.
Not to the full extent, no.
Well, it has started, but not very much.
That's right.
Do we know the companies involved?
We
In
do.
West
I don't know them off.
Okay.
I can give you some names, but no.
Brendan, do you have any questions?
And I was going to say, Dr. Neil is going
Yeah, great. Yes, yep. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very tricky situation. What we're talking about is my grandmother's country in Nukunbar, and so we have a company that has gone to that country and has told the people, you know, these are the benefits that you're going to get. What I like to explain to the old people is that we are talking about a canning basin that is 550,000 square kilometres on land, plus another 110,000 square kilometres offshore. So when I try to explain this story to the elders and the old people, what I say is, we're all sitting on one big water tank. When we start to piss in that water, we're all going to drink it. So what we're saying is that we need to combine traditional ecological knowledge, because we have a traditional story that talks to us about methane gas, and we need to be able to combine traditional ecological knowledge, which I call Indigenous science, with the Western science, and put it there and give us all the time to fully understand, because those of you that have been in the native title game know that we have 60 days in which to come up with whether or not we're going with something or not. So my challenge is, how do I create and communicate science in ordinary everyday language to the other citizens that live in the region, but also to tell the story using our traditional ecological knowledge. So these systems are there. And what we're saying is that these sorts of cases are also built not on science alone, but on a political imperative to develop. We know the state of the globe is in this situation because of the predatory elite and the capitalist system that we're in. So we need to be very, very clear that this will not be one on legal on its own. This will not be one on science. It's a combination of these knowledge systems to take us all to a new paradigm and to raise the consciousness of everyone living around us.